Woohee! Canadian Computer Collector here, and I'm glad you've joined me because today we're going over the most insane thing that I've ever attempted on this channel. Today we're building a PC inside a Necropolis. I say today, but this took like the better part of a year working behind the scenes when we were doing other projects at the channel, and a lot of things happened in that time. What's a Necropolis? Well, you might call it a spooky castle, or more accurately, an undead castle. And this one's inspired by a game that came out roughly 25 years ago and is still played to this day, mostly by people in the Balkans, but it is nonetheless still very popular. And that's
Heroes of Might and Magic 3.
If you love high fantasy, this is the build for you.
Sir?
History time! Heroes of Might and Magic 3, also known as Heroes 3 colloquially, is a high fantasy video game developed by New World Computing and released by 3DO in 1999. This turn-based strategy RPG was not to be confused with the games it was inspired by, the Might and Magic series. These early first-person RPGs were well received, but not as storied as the Heroes of Might and Magic line, which offered a macro approach to RPG storytelling. And while the Might and Magic series is all but dead, Heroes 3 remains strong in the hearts of many Eastern Europeans and others all around the world. In fact, it currently ranks in the top 100 games being streamed on Twitch, and a Facebook fan group alone has over 142,000 members from all over the world with multiple posts a day. We're talking like 12 to 20, know what I'm saying? Not bad for a 25-year-old PC game, ladies. Part of what keeps this game alive is its age. Because it's so old, you can run it on almost any machine built in the last millennium. This makes it popular in countries where high-performance hardware is prohibitively expensive or just not easily attained. Thanks to its huge global player base, there are a number of community-curated versions that exist now that offer things like quality of life improvements and new content, keeping the game fresh and interesting. I frequently play one called Horn of the Abyss, and if you ask me, I think it's perfect. Oh, crap. Shoutout LTTstore.com. In Heroes 3, you start out by selecting a castle from a number of different races. The one that I have always played the most is Necropolis, or the town of the undead. Might call me the mayor of bones, the mayor that bone. Once you got your castle selected, you choose your hero. In this case, you'd be choosing from a series of necromancers or death knights, and they'll wage war against your enemies using an army of vampires, zombies, skeletons, liches, and more. The Necropolis was such a core part of my childhood that I found myself choosing necromancers in almost every game where it was possible going forward. Cue Diablo 2. Also shout out to my barbarian, Steely Dan, and my necro, Dan Kofkius. So after I'd finished building my idealized Windows XP LAN machine desktop for a video on the channel, I wanted to do something really creative, and I'd already wet my beak in the Windows XP arena, so why not build something in tribute to one of my favorite childhood games that would absolutely fly on Windows XP.
Sir?
I started out by digging around my collection to find the smallest case that I could possibly use. I wanted something that was petite enough that I could glue a bunch of custom foam panels around it to get the shape of our castle. And I also wanted to kind of maintain some sort of rigidity and structural integrity, so using the original case just made sense. It also has standardized holes for things like the motherboard and case fans and a whole bunch of other stuff. It seemed like the right move. So after pulling out this little guy, an HP something, I tested it and installed Windows XP Service Pack 2, not because Service Pack 2 excites me emotionally, but because it was the closest disk that I could see. This was a smaller PC my brother picked up for our Windows XP LAN, but it wasn't very exciting, so he ended up punting it my way. I do have some ideas in mind though. So here we have a WinFast motherboard, which is kinda take it or leave it, with an AMD Athlon 64x2 dual-core 4200 plus processor. It also has 3 gigs of RAM, and we threw in a passively cooled GeForce 7600 GS. Now it's time to talk about design. We have a case and a functional computer. Now we need to figure out what it's going to look like. So I mocked up a couple drawings using my first-gen iPad and Apple Pencil. And while they're pretty basic, so are my moves. So I was not fazed. But it did give me the rough idea that I needed to start trying to figure out how to mock up the body and then build it with styrofoam. One thing I knew is I didn't want to use any 3D printed parts. I don't know, I'm not wild about 3D printers. I'm an old Warhammer guy. I played it for like 10 or 15 years or whatever. I played like 3rd edition, 5th edition, 7th, 8th, 9th, like, you know, modeling is in my blood, and this is the kind of thing I love. So I didn't want to use CAD, or this gets to scratch that creative itch that was itching the shit out of me. With the computer tested and working and a design roughly planned out, I disassembled everything, vacuumed and washed it like I do my ass. Then I broke down the motherboard and washed that as well. That's right. With soap and water in a sink. Not only did I have a great time, but so did the fan. As you can see, it's blowing around a couple pieces from my tunnel RAM. So since I washed the motherboard with water, I decided to wait a few days for it to dry. Then I reassembled it and added a little bit of extra cooling flair, which we'll get into in a moment. Since this computer's meant to be like a friggin' diorama, I needed a strong base for it.
And a strong man.
After looking around my place, I went with the middle of an old IKEA coffee table, I believe by the name of
Lack.
But let me tell you, it didn't lack rigidity. Know what I'm saying, ladies? This made it sturdy enough that I could build up the sides with styrofoam and some drywall mud. After all, it's a mud castle. I moved some boxes around the tower to get a rough idea of how I wanted things to go. But then I realized I'd like the PC to sit a little bit higher. To fix this, I grabbed a couple 2x4s that were laying around and not helping with rent, and screwed the base of the case to them. This was a bit tedious, but the end result was just as I'd hoped for, and after fastening it to the
Lack.
we were ready to start on some of the more fun parts. Because we're basically insulating this computer with styrofoam, I decided that I would install my very own custom tunnel RAM. This tunnel RAM would allow the CPU cooler to breathe air directly from outside the case or to expel it into outer space. The tunnel RAM install began by figuring out where the CPU cooler sat in relation to the side panel of the case. I then cut a hole using a Dremel and some cutting discs, and then filed down the edges and added some automotive weather stripping to avoid anyone in future cutting a finger or a nipple. With all that sorted out, I ordered a 92mm fan with green glow off of eBay because we're building a spooky castle. And then why a 92mm fan? Why a 92mm hole? My lord? I had this super cool fan grill. I don't even remember what it came off of, but it kind of reminds me of the Death Star or something you'd see on like an evil lair, so I really wanted to go with it, and that's what we did. It also happened that the tunnel RAM was also 92mm, so. After that, I cut some foam to fit around the fan and covered the side panel. And once cut, I covered the fan with tape, and then used spray glue to adhere the styrofoam together. And I will say, spray glue is a major pain in the ass. Like, this stuff stuck to everything and took forever to wash off. I was dousing myself in lighter fluid, so. I started digging into my shipping tub to find some small boxes that I could arrange into that rough shape that we designed on the iPad. And then came the styrofoam. Don't say came. This stuff, I don't know, what is it? Like 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, 1 inch. Ladies, there was a ton to get through, so enjoy this montage. I just want to take a moment to shout out Hot Glue Guns here. They saved the day and made everything possible. I think I might even marry one. Obviously, you can't marry a hot glue gun, but you can make hot love to it. Don't burn your pee. After I started gluing some of the styrofoam, I realized that it might be a struggle to get the side panel off of this thing. So I dug around some of the loose pieces in my collection and found these two little metal handles. They were the perfect size, so I drilled a few holes and slid them through, and when I'm not accessing it, I can slide them in a little bit and then pull them out so that I can pull off that side panel. It's almost like they're telescopic. One of the big features I wanted on this build was a light up obelisk as featured in Heroes 3 in the Necropolis when you find the Grail. I ordered up some resin from Amazon at the time. Boo. And a few pyramid molds, and then I got to work. It was actually pretty fun doing this. I'd always seen people pour resin molds online, but I'd never tried it myself, and it was pretty straightforward. And while the resin was drying, I decided to wire up those LEDs. This kitten purrs, am I right? Motorcycles, right boys? To add some extra texture and make it easier for plaster to stick to, I glued pieces of corkboard down around the exterior of the case and built up the banks on the sides where the 2x4 blocks were located. It was not going to be easy to plaster over top of a shiny, slippery IKEA piece, so this gave something for it to cling to. It also built up the topography and gave it a more cohesive environment. I had a large string of LED lights left over just sitting around my place. I'd ordered a 2-pack and 2-pack and put one of them behind one of my IKEA Kallax shelves, so this one was sitting there. There was a ton left over on the spool after I kind of arranged it throughout the case, so I glued the spool into the case as well. Once all the foam was in place, it was time for plaster. I basically just used drywall mud to do it. Some might think this is silly, but it actually makes it easier to sand down where needed, and once you get enough layers of paint on it, it does a pretty good job of sealing it. Barring any major catastrophes, I don't see this thing really disintegrating. I will say though, mudding this thing sucked ass. You might say it sucked mud from a butt. It took forever and was not interesting at all, and the only thing worse was sanding it. That was like sucking the sand out of a butt. With the whole thing buttoned up, it was now time for paint. And this is kind of where I made my first mistake. The first layer I put on it, I spray painted, and I held it too far away, so the paint basically clung to it, dried, and then rubbed right off. As a result, I went out a second time, and I hit it way closer with the spray paint, and then started noticing that the styrofoam was beginning to melt. And since this build has been all... Oh my god, jeez. Since this build has been all by hand and a major... Why not add paint to the list? I tell you, it was a really uplifting feeling to see the case melting after I'd spent hours applying drywall mud and sanding it. So what did I do? I rushed the thing home in my car and started hand bombing paint all over the case using different size brushes and acrylics. With multiple layers sealing the styrofoam in, I switched over to my airbrush to add some depth, and then actually I switched back to a couple cans of spray paint to make highlights. The acrylic layer held through the whole thing, and the spray paint didn't end up melting the end. So take that, spray paint. I had to meet my buddy Rory at the shop because he was going to help paint the logo on this lovely backdrop. So I decided to bring the castle down and catch up a little bit on painting the base. I call that a win, just like attacking a horde of peasants with zounds, skeletons. That one's for the Heroes 3 fans. Alright, at this point I was nearly a year into this build, and we were like 2 or 3 weeks away from driving to Chicago for VCF Midwest. The plan was, my girlfriend and I were going to go out in her Hyundai Tucson, certainly we're going to be shoving it in the back of my 97 Civic hatchback, low mileage, beautiful car to drive, and we were also going to take the iMac to monitor conversion that we did on the channel, and hopefully display both of them, do some networking, have some fun. But if we didn't finish the PC, what was left? Like, me showing up and taking my shirt off until people asked me to leave? I don't want to see that. They don't want to see that. Nobody wants to see that. But at this point, that actually might be a better plan. After finally getting the Necropolis to a place where I wanted it, it was time to give it a hero. I acquired a model from Warhammer Age of Sigmar, or Warhammer Fantasy Battle, if you're one of the OGs, that I thought captured the vibe of the original Heroes game and the type of heroes that you would have if you'd selected Necropolis as your castle. I spent an evening at home with the airbrush on this thing and then brought it inside for some edge highlights, and with a quick flick of the brush, he was all good to go. And of course, you gotta love it, right at the last minute, some of the LEDs broke connection inside the obelisk, so I had to take everything apart, lengthen them, and then solder everything back together, test it out, and we were still good to go. It was just that it happened like the day before we were supposed to leave to Chicago, and for a moment there, a little pea came out. With the whole thing done, I removed the top, placed it into my lady's Hyundai Tucson, and then we hit the road for Chicago. 15 hours on a bad back ended up doing way more damage than I'd hoped, and now I totally regret making that drive. Some good and bad news though, the castle arrived in one piece, but I was barely walking by that point. If you don't know, I have a very bad back. It's like my body type is a Ziploc bag full of water, and the little plastic zip part has undone. Except unlike a Ziploc bag full of water, none of the water is escaping, and I just keep getting rounder. Nonetheless, Chicago was awesome. We set the computer up. Tons of people loved it. They took photos and video. Some people tried playing Heroes on it. They thought it was wild looking, and I'll be honest, they're right. Beyond the computer, though, it was awesome to meet so many of the friends I've made online running this YouTube channel, as well as some new faces. One of them even gave me an original copy of Heroes 3 in the box. Shout out to Garth Beagle. So let's hit that final reveal. Here are the beauty shots, baby. Look at how clean this thing is, and how buttery smooth it runs Heroes 3. Just like the butter that I eat every night before bed. Come on, Selma, baby. Take a bow. I'd also like to shout out our patrons. You people are the blood flowing through the body of Canadian computer collectors, so thank you for everything you do. You guys keep us fresh and real and showered and deodorized. I'm just kidding. Money goes toward the channel and upkeep for our equipment, not deodorant and showers. I spend my own money on that for you. And if you're interested in supporting a nonprofit, I do some work for this lovely cat shelter in Alberta, Canada called Hervey Cats. It's a wonderful little place where cats at the end of their lives or those in precarious situations can go to live there. They're a no-kill shelter. They're provided a home setting for the rest of their days, and I just think what they do is great. So if you head to herveycats.com, the link is on the bottom of the screen there. If you're able to donate, hit the donate button. If not, just go check out some of the cool stuff on there. They have great content and a blog that's worth looking at. And during these tough times, those kitties need some help, so let's all band together and help some push. If you liked watching me struggle to build this insane Necropolis PC, be sure to check out this video where I put together my ideal Windows XP LAN machine that I would have wanted as a teenager.